Hey guys, this is Savannah from earthandwater.co. Today I'm here with Dr. Dawson Church, Uplife founder and author of award-winning books, Genie in Your Genes, Mind to Matter, and Bliss Brain. These are all really cool subjects that I definitely align with. You also have a ton of papers published in peer-reviewed journals, which is awesome because I talk a lot about joining spirituality and science so that we can get away from the title of spiritual things being woo woo and crazy and anchor it more in our practical physical plane for application purposes.
Absolutely. And what's so cool, Savannah, is that over the last 30 or 40 years, we've been using science to quantify spirituality in terms of the change it produces in the mind and the body. And the magnitude of that change in energy medicine and mindfulness and studies that examine these kinds of approaches, the magnitude of change it produces in pain, anxiety, depression, happiness is enormous. Like in one study, I did a meta-analysis with some colleagues of using acupressure tapping, EFT, for PTSD. And most of the studies we examined in that meta-analysis were randomized controlled trials of veterans, of refugees, people who've been severely impacted by traumatic events and traumatic stress. And we measured the magnitude of treatment effects on those people. And in the scale used in meta-analyses, a treatment effect of 2 means your treatment's having an effect. 5, it's pretty good. 8, it's extremely effective. We found an effect of 12. So these supposedly woo-woo things, energy, acupressure, meditation, mindfulness, in a lot of the research are being shown by science to be incredibly effective at up-leveling our lives.
Yeah, even things that we thought that we weren't in control of, like gene expression.
It is amazing. When I did that first study, we began that study in about 2009, finished and published it in 2017, and we were looking at gene expression in veterans. And these were mostly men, and just the degree of trauma that they'd been in. A lot of them were Vietnam veterans. And so for 35 or 40 years, they'd suffered from flashbacks and intrusive thoughts that popped into their mind, thoughts of combat just popping into their heads during everyday events and hypervigilance. They were looking for what was a threat all the time, even in safe situations. And all of those symptoms just went away. We saw a 60% reduction in all of those PTSD symptoms. What was so amazing was that their gene expression changed significantly, and inflammation in their body, genes that control inflammation, were significantly upregulated. Genes that control immunity made them more immune to flu, colds, COVID, all these kinds of environmental threats. Those genes were dramatically upregulated. So better immunity, heightened ability to control inflammation in the body. It's literally changing your body down to the level of molecules in your cells.
Are we speaking specifically on EFT or all of it? Meditation, mindfulness?
There's a big body of research now on energy therapies, and some of them are better researched than others. Acupuncture is probably the best researched, with over 13,000 clinical trials. EFT has over 200 studies. Meditation and mindfulness have well over 1,000. In fact, there are hundreds being published every year at this point. And so all of these methods have their merits, some different than others. And so in my book, This Brain, I look, for example, at kinds of meditation and which meditations are really effective at triggering positive gene expression and positive neuroplasticity. Like, what is making a difference in helping you fire the neural circuits of creativity, of joy, of resilience. And it turns out when you look at all the meditation studies that there are particular kinds of meditation, particular components of meditation that are more effective than all the others. And the 3 that are the most effective are community, intensity, and compassion. And so meditations that draw you into compassion for other people, where you just have a sense of gratitude, awe, love, and joy, positive emotions, those meditation styles trigger gene expression quicker than those that don't include compassion. And then meditating in groups has been shown to be more effective than meditating as the traditional solitary, sort of lone holy hermit. Meditating in a group is more effective. And then intensity. So We read Carlos Castaneda and we read Rumi, we read Saint Teresa, and these people are passionate. Martin Luther King and Gandhi, Mother Teresa, they weren't just like, oh, I feel kind of good today. They were like just describing these, they were having a passionate love affair with the divine. And so when you get to that level of intensity, that's when really interesting things start to show up on the MRI. And now that little bit of neural plasticity you were producing before, you crank up the emotion to wild passion like a Rumi or a Kabir, you find that now all kinds of neural shift is happening in your mind and body, and your brain is changing. In one randomized controlled trial I did, we found that people using evidence-based meditation were able to produce remarkable structural changes in their brain in 30 days. So it does not take 10,000 hours, does not take going into a monastery. You can do it just with meditation in a month.
Yeah, people really have that misconception of meditation that you have to essentially be a monk to practice it effectively. And that's not true at all. I tell people all the time that when I got started with meditation, I was a super busy mom of two toddlers who was running her own business. You know, I had zero time, I had negative time. And you have to find those little moments throughout the day, creating space in between the thoughts, in between the to-do list items, and between the moments. So simply like when you're in the shower or when you're trying to go to sleep at night, instead of letting your mind run rampant on, tomorrow's to-do list or what happened today or, 10 years ago or whatever our minds do when we're not reining them back in and telling them what to do, you can focus your mind towards these meditations because that's really all meditation is focusing your mind.
In fact, the goal of meditation is not to learn to meditate well or effectively. The goal of meditation is to learn to be in a meditative state in ordinary life. In that randomized controlled trial, we were actually examining people's brain activity, not when they were meditating, just when they were laying there in the MRI and in an ordinary state of consciousness. And we found that two regions of the brain changed. They were using a method of meditation, by the way, called eco meditation. And it's really effective because it includes tapping, mindfulness, neurofeedback, and other evidence-based techniques. So we know from science it really works. And we found that in the MRI, after a month of doing that compared to controls, we found that people doing eco meditation for a month were in that state, not during meditation, but eyes open, just ordinary consciousness. So the goal of meditation isn't to make you a fantastic meditator. The goal is to bring you into an elevated state in your daily life. And we find that happens, that people cross an invisible boundary. The boundary is invisible, we can't see it, but we can read it on advanced scans because what's happening is that certain regions of their brain are firing together and wiring together, and then those show up on MRI scans as increased neural capacity in those regions. In one of the case histories I report in my book, Bliss Brain, I talk about a guy he had a TV show in Australia. His name was Graham Phillips. And he wanted to learn to meditate. So he took his whole TV crew into an advanced neuroimaging lab. They gave him a complete workup, spent a day doing MRI scans of him, hormone tests, all kinds of evaluations of his body and his brain. And so they knew the volume of every part of his brain. He then spent his time learning to be mindful, spent 2 months really applying himself to mindfulness, went back into that lab after 2 months, and the emotion regulation circuit in his brain, the circuit that regulates annoyance, overwhelm, anger, disappointment, frustration, blame, shame, all the other negative emotions, that circuit that just helps you control, helps you regulate those emotions. That circuit in his brain had 22.8% more neural matter in it. That part of his brain had grown 22.8% in 8 weeks. And that's how quickly some parts of our brains change when we use our minds to shift ourselves. So these techniques have dramatic effects in their ability to literally reshape the hardware of our brains and make us more resilient, more creative, and dramatically more joyful.
Yeah, it's all just emotional regulation. Imagine where we would be as a society if we taught that to children or were taught as children.
Absolutely. Because, there are all kinds of things that will annoy us, that will trigger us. If we can regulate those emotions, then we open up space in our consciousness for having a happy life. And imagine the person, I mean, we've all known people who are triggered by so many things. There are people who like walk around life they're basically, an explosion looking for a place to happen. And so there are those people who are just always in search of the next thing to trigger themselves with. And once their lives are calm for a little while, they'll produce some other trigger. And so you don't want to live your life that way. For one thing, highly degrades your body. If you are driving your stress hormone cortisol up repeatedly, chronic high cortisol results in reduced muscle mass, reduced bone density, reduced memory and learning, reduced skin elasticity. You age much faster if you have high cortisol, a shorter lifespan, greater risk for cancer, heart disease, all kinds of other ills. So uncontrolled emotions literally are killing us. And teaching our kids emotional regulation, learning emotional regulation is vital to our health and longevity.
Yeah, the number one thing I focus on with my clients is stress management because there's not a whole lot after that you have to do. If you can get your emotions and your stress levels under control, everything else falls into place.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the first thing to do. So, like, there are four in this brain, I talk about four circuits in the brain. We have four very well mapped circuits in our brain that contribute in a network to the enlightenment experience, to the awakening experience, which we measure in monks and nuns. And there are these four networks. And the very first one I recommend people focus on is emotion regulation. Now, you get emotion regulation down, which you can do in about a month. You can start to, again, bulk up that part of the brain and it gets bigger and better at regulating emotion. I then have people focus on attention and paying attention because our attention is very scattered and people look at their cell phones all the time. They're distracted by all kinds of things. That makes it hard to have a meditative focus. Whereas monks and nuns have superb focus and you need focus to accomplish things in your life. The third of those four circuits I talk about in Bliss Brain is the circuit that governs self-obsession. And we have a part of our brain called the mid-prefrontal cortex, right behind the forehead. That part of the brain is highly focused on me and my money, my love life, my appearance, what people think of me, my career, my. Monks and nuns don't have that focus. They're thinking about not themselves, but other people and also the infinite. They're having this relationship with something larger than themselves. They're not self-obsessed. That part of their brains is very quiet. And we found in that randomized controlled trial of eco-meditation that part of the brain, the mid-prefrontal cortex, became very, very quiet after 30 days. And the fourth of the four circuits is compassion. We have a whole lobe of our brain called the insula, which is devoted to, among other things, positive emotion. So it's active in gratitude and awe and joy and compassion. And we found, again, in that same study, that part of the brain was highly active in people after a month. So the compassion lobe of the brain lights up, and then you have those four circuits active. But the very first one we train people to activate is emotion regulation, as you're saying you do with your clients.
Yeah. It's important for people to know too that we have that programming in our brain that makes us self-centered. And it takes a essentially training your brain to go from the me to the we. And knowing that and remembering that helps you recognize it in both yourself and the people in your life that you may still be having turmoil with. An example I come up with is a mom who is neglectful to her children. And the children are like, Mom, why do you keep leaving? Why do you keep abandoning me? And instead of recognizing that she's affecting her children, all she does is give excuses to, well, I was going through that. This was hard for me. And this isn't making excuses as much as bringing awareness to people who are in this situation so that you can recognize it in your family members who are causing you pain and start to kind of understand what they're working with so that you can maybe improve the relationship.
Yeah, it definitely improves your relationships. And we measure things like relationship satisfaction. We find it increases dramatically when you learn these kinds of techniques, because otherwise you're, again, acting reactively. That person who said or did something harmful to you 10 years ago, 20 years ago, now it's the holidays, you're seeing them again. And are you going to react the same way now and reinforce that old conditioning in your brain? Or do you have the ability to step back, breathe, tap, relax, shift yourself into a conscious state, and then respond consciously with deliberateness and often with compassion. What's been really remarkable to me is to see people who've been really wounded and injured by others who are able to come to that place of compassion for them. Remember one woman who I worked with, and she was really upset about her violent father. And one of the worst events from her childhood, she described to me, was when her father, she was, I think she was 8. She was 8 years old, and her parents were separated. Her mom was living with a boyfriend. The kids were living with a mom, and she had a younger brother. And her dad literally broke the back door down and dashed into the house, slammed his fist into the boyfriend. There was blood spurting out of his face, grabbed the kids, both kids, ran out of the house and threw them in the back of his pickup truck and drove off with them. And it took a while before they were able to get back to their mother. It was like one of the worst times of her life. Um, I remember working with her, and we were in front of a big audience actually at a medical conference. I was doing EFT tapping, where you use acupressure tapping on acupressure points to depotentiate all these emotional memories. And she peeled back layer after layer after layer of her trauma. And this was again this terrible event from her childhood, and she processed it as she was tapping with me in front of the audience there. When she had brought her level of emotion down, this sudden burst of memory flooded her, and she began to cry. And she said, I totally suppressed this memory. I didn't remember my mom's boyfriend was molesting my younger brother, and that's why dad came and got us out of there. So this event that to her had been the symbol of her abusive father suddenly flipped. We call it in psychology a cognitive shift. And you will literally start to see the events of your life differently after you use these methods. Same life, different perspective on those past events.
Yeah, that's usually what happens is that once you start addressing it and focusing on it, because that's what a lot of people, that is the work, and that's what a lot of people avoid because they don't want to sit and think about it. They don't want to feel those emotions. They don't want to analyze it. They don't care. They don't care where the other person was coming from. They just throw a wall up and they think, well, they could have done better. They should have done better. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. And the word forgiveness really triggers people a lot of the time. But oftentimes, if you do take the time to really sit with it and figure it out, you can come to a place of forgiveness to these individuals that were not trying, usually not trying to be a complete, trying to find a word that's friendly.
I know what you mean.
Yes. But there are most oftentimes people
A
who
so and so.
were having a hard time and doing the best that they had with what the trauma, the layers and layers of trauma that they had. So we don't always, as humans, know how to react in a situation or circumstances. We have no idea how we're going to react in situations or circumstances until the situation arises. And again, that's what meditation helps us with is slowing things down so that we can pause and think and uh, instead of react, respond.
Yeah, I had a situation like that for a long time. I had a mentor who retired, and when he retired, and he'd been mentoring me for a few years, and he really needed place to kind of have his work continued by his students. So he gave me much of his work to carry on. And so it was wonderful. He retired for a year, went away, and was having a great, relaxed life. And then he decided to make a comeback. After a year, he got bored, and so he demanded that I just basically drop everything I was doing and hand it all back to him, and that it was not going to be him again. And we'd established so much momentum behind a new school of therapy and all kinds of other assets that we couldn't do that very easily. And so he sued me. And that lawsuit lasted on and off for 7 years.
Wow.
And being sued by your mentor is really, really painful, really difficult. And so I just was holding him in compassion. Like I realized this guy just had unresolved issues. And so I just would think of him and think, how sad, I'm such a shame this is happening. I feel for him being that triggered that he would just keep on with this lawsuit for year after year after year. And I held that compassion for a long time. Now eventually we won the lawsuit. And so eventually after 7 years, we were vindicated. But in that 7 years, just holding him in compassion, did it do anything for him? Who knows? Did it do anything for me? Absolutely. It lowered my cortisol. It meant that I wasn't getting all stressed and triggered when I thought about him, or to deal with my lawyers and all the legal bills. It was over $1 million of legal expenses. So it was a huge, big drain. And yet I just held him in compassion the whole way through. You're not doing it. You're not forgiving for them. You're forgiving for you. So you lower your own stress level and you create a wonderful life. There are people who have injured you, but you're bigger than them when you have compassion on them and you move past them. So often we find people move into that perspective of compassion for the perpetrator, and that's the adult perspective. When you are a child, when you are 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 years old, you don't have any power. You're just at the mercy of the crazy adults around you. When you're 35, 45, you have power. And so you have this powerful adult. If somebody says something mean to you, you walk away. You couldn't do that when you were 3 and it was your mother or your father or your older brother or your cousin. So you have power now. And as you have compassion, you are reclaiming the adult perspective. And your job, essentially, as an adult, once you turn 18, 19, 25, 35, is you are reparenting your own wounded child. And until you complete that process, again, you're going to be dragging elements of your past around with you. And research shows that people who don't do that have dramatic health consequences. This was a massive study started in the early 1990s called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And they found that people who had adverse childhood experiences, like that woman I worked with whose father burst in and grabbed her and her brother, people who had those experiences of their parents fighting, of divorce, of a mental illness in the family, those people have much higher levels of cancer, heart disease, hepatitis, obesity, all kinds of other illnesses. And these illnesses show up in their 50s. So these events happened a half century before, and now, 50 years later, they're showing up as cancer, heart disease, and other killers. So it is so important to go back and deal with your past and reparent yourself and move that adult perspective to forgive, to have compassion. Those people were doing their best, even though it may have been short-sighted and had a lot of problems to it. But they were doing their best. And when we move into that compassionate perspective, we're taking the stance of the adult and saying, okay, I am a powerful person right now, and I'm going to go in and heal that childhood trauma and not drag that burden around with me any longer. And it also produces a dramatic effect on our health and longevity. So we give ourselves this huge gift by doing exactly what you say.
I agree completely. Reparenting ourselves is something that a lot of us don't realize that we need to do. We talk, and it's all kind of the same thing. We use all of these different words to get these points across and explain these concepts: the meditation, the reparenting, the emotional regulation, the working through trauma, the taking off layers. It's essentially all the same thing. And it is baggage that you're carrying around with you, dragging around with you. It's heavy, it's hindersome, it affects every relationship in your life, also with yourself. It affects every situation. And relationships aren't only with people and yourself, it's also your relationships with food, your relationships with money, your relationships with your career. Literally everything in your life is a relationship. And this baggage that we have to shed frees us up to work on those and give energy to the progress and health of our relationships with our body and ourself and our family and our friends and our career and everything. And a lot of us, we weren't, so many people weren't parented properly as a child, and they don't even realize, well, I mean, they realize, but they don't realize how deep it is and how hard it is and how much relearning they have to do until they become parents. And then a lot of parents are stuck in this rock and a hard place where they're recognizing their own parents come through themselves in parenting their children. And they're like, then they're panicking. Oh my gosh, no, don't like that, don't want that. But that's perfect that you panic in that situation, because then you can stop it in its tracks and reparent. That's when you become reparenting yourself and your children. Um, just like you would tell your kid how to eat properly. Don't binge all of this candy. You're going to get a bellyache. You also have to tell yourself that and stop yourself in your tracks when you're doing these things, even when nobody else is around.
You know, our parents and our surroundings, our environment, people around us as we were growing up, are our models for how to behave.
Mm.
And as our brain was forming, as our neurons were being shaped, they were being shaped by our environment and our experiences. And children, like especially young children, are just learning machines. Their brains are firing and wiring at an astonishing pace. A baby's brain grows dramatically in the first while after birth, and the the fastest growing region is emotion. For the first 2 years, the emotional part of the brain is firing and wiring the most. Now, after that, parts of the brain start to fire and wire and become more active. But the emotional learnings of the first 2 years, the modeling that you see for how your parents handle stress, handle each other, handle relationships, are not thoughts. They're neurons. They're getting hardwired into your neural network. And then later on, we have more and more and more learning. For the first 5 years of life, the two primary brain waves in the brain are delta and theta. And delta is our slowest brain wave. It's also the brain wave of deep sleep. When we're in deep sleep, our brains are in delta. When we're dreaming, our brains are in theta, the next slowest wave. So we have these two slow brain waves, delta and theta, which are characteristic of sleep, of dreaming, but they're also characteristic of trance. When you have somebody hypnotized going into a trance, they drop into theta and delta. When you're in a state of super learning, you are in delta and theta. When you're in altered states, you're in delta and theta. So that child before the age of 5 is in a super learning trance. They are sucking this information in, and it's becoming part of the structure of their brains. So you try and change it when they're 15 or 25, it's embedded there in their neurons, and it's really, really hard to change. When I was 15 years old, my family had a lot of issues, and I just wanted to get away from everything, especially the church. And so I went away and I joined a spiritual community. My father was a minister. I didn't want anything to do with the church. I saw all the hypocrisy in the church. I just wanted to be somewhere else. So I went and studied the world's great philosophies, the world's great, what's called the perennial philosophy behind all the world's religions. I went to live on a commune. And so I spent a lot of years doing that lifestyle. And when I pulled back and went into that kind of a learning process, I found it's hard to change. I tried to change myself, and it was really, really, really difficult. So I then spent about 30 years studying psychology, studying the world's spiritual traditions, really trying to change myself. Then when I turned 45, I made the commitment to meditating every day. And that really began to help me shift dramatically quickly. So the things you can do to help you shift quickly, and energy work does that. I found that at that age, I was able to shift things with energy therapies that I'd never been able to shift with either spirituality or psychology. So we now do have these well-researched therapies, EMDR, EFT, yoga therapy is really effective, acupuncture, acupressure are incredible. A lot of the energy-based therapies like Reiki and Jo-Ray have healing effects. And we're now realizing this whole realm of energy healing allows us to heal even these entrenched issues like PTSD. So you can reparent yourself now much easier with these kinds of approaches than you could 30, 40, 50 years ago before we understood that all these things were so powerful. And again, to circle back to your first question, that's science. Science is showing us that these things work and by how much they work. We now know that compassion, that emotional intensity, and groups are the three most important ways of sparking neuroplastic change in your brain because science tells us that. So it doesn't mean you'll never do anything other than that in meditation, but at least we know what is the most effective and we can layer it into our favorite method of meditation. And so science is giving us ways to accelerate human development now like we've never had before and put spirituality and science together in that way, which I do in my books and my workshops and my work. And you have this remarkable combination that can take that person who's had a traumatic childhood and just have them emerging into their full potential in a few sessions. So we're in an exciting stage right now in mental health. EFT tapping, which I teach, has now been accepted as an evidence-based therapy by the Veterans Administration. It's used in England in the national healthcare system. It's making inroads into primary care. All these wonderful new therapies are spreading worldwide. We estimate that about 40 million people use EFT tapping, energy therapy, which is based on acupressure worldwide. So 40 million people are estimated to be using it. It's being used in Ukraine. We just got done training a group of Ukrainian psychologists to use it with refugees there. And so it's being used in Palestine. It's being used in other trouble spots in the world. It was used extensively in Rwanda after the genocide there. So we are now able to get help to people who before would just suffer for the rest of their lives. Now we're in a new place in human awareness and in medical treatment and in psychological treatment where we have these effective treatments. And it's wonderful to see them spreading and being accessible to people all over the globe.
And I love it. I love every bit of it because historically we've sectioned ourselves out off between a mind and a body and a spirit and whatever else may have you, a foot and a hand even. And that's not the ideal way, obviously. It didn't, it helped us get along as best we could, it wasn't totally useless, but now that all of these things are coming together and we are starting to treat ourselves as a whole individual, you're right. Healing is making leaps and bounds in um it's happening a lot faster and a lot more fully than before when we were just treating one symptom or that symptom and not the cause of the symptom, which is most often how we feel, like
It's just
emotionally.
amazing that you can have a thought and it'll trigger a gene. Like, for example, if you were to be driving down the freeway and have a near miss, a near accident, then you're going to have a very, very rapid response. Our body is designed to respond rapidly to threats. Your cortisol shoots up in 3 seconds. Your adrenaline shoots up in a second. And there's a gene called CYP11B1 that turns on and it triggers the production of cortisol. And that gene is triggered again in a second in response to that near miss on the freeway. But if you go back home that night, 9 hours later, and tell your family about the near accident on the freeway, guess what happens to that stress gene CYP11B1? It turns on again. And now you're flooding your body with cortisol, and there's no real accident. And if you then start to obsess about the near accident and think about it over and over and over again, the near accident happened in a few moments. It was over in a few moments. Your cortisol subsided in a few moments. But now you're triggering cortisol purely by thought alone. So the idea that we have a mind over here and a body over here is completely inaccurate. We're interwoven beings, spirit. We are consciousness. Rumi, the great poet Rumi, said that we are not a drop in the ocean, that we are the ocean of consciousness in a drop. You are literally the universe, uh, as a human being in a human body, living a human life, and with this immense privilege of being conscious, living a conscious life. And so seizing that moment, meditating, connecting with something larger than yourself gives you the chance to really shift your whole awareness, shift your spiritual, mental, and emotional life, and produce dramatic shifts in the body. Again, we see your cortisol dropping way down. In one of my clinical trials, we found that people meditating and tapping for a week intensively at a retreat center, their baseline cortisol dropped 37%. That means you're going to be way healthier, way better immunity, way better physiological function, and it only took a week. So we are interwoven beings, and as we meditate, connect with something larger than ourselves, it's producing radical shifts in our bodies. We find that people who are having awakening experiences are living a lot longer. Their health span is much longer. They have less incidence of various diseases. And even if they do have rough patches in their lives, they are resilient. They bounce back quickly. So everyone owes it to themselves to give themselves these tools and to claim the kind of life that our brains, with those wonderful enlightenment circuits, are capable of giving us.
Yeah. And just like we've created this world that we live in now, full of the turmoil and the problems and the suffering by hurt people hurting people, unhealed, traumatized children who grow up and perpetuate that trauma and negativity essentially to their children, and then that just ripples out. Meditation does the opposite. It heals the world. It heals everybody around you, not only from your interactions, but they've done studies where they dropped meditators into certain cities, like groups of them, or monks even, and they saw the crime rate significantly drop just in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, in fact, those meditation groups are working right now on all the world's trouble spots. There are groups of literally thousands of meditators meditating round the clock on projecting peace into some of the world's conflict zones. And again, those studies showed that there are group effects here that those have value in reducing the intensity of conflict.
Yeah, it's also passed through like trauma essentially is passed through our genetics to our children as well. So you have these generational traumas that span whole cultures and whole areas of existence.
Yeah, and we see that, for example, in gene studies of the offspring of Holocaust survivors. And that research was amazing. It was published starting in the 1990s, and it showed that the granddaughters of women who survived the Holocaust in Nazi Germany in the 1940s, their granddaughters had some of the same epigenetic tags on their DNA that their grandmothers had. So here we have trauma being passed along epigenetically across 3 generations in human studies. And so some of the stuff you're feeling, some of the bad vibes you're feeling, some of the bad experiences you're having, they're not you. They're your ancestors. And it's worth doing ancestral healing as well, because it may just not be you. It may be something you've inherited from your ancestors. And it's a behavior pattern, it's a stress pattern that maybe was adaptive to them living in medieval Russia or medieval China, but it's completely destructive to you now. It's raising your cortisol, turning on those adverse genes, and it's affecting your life right now. And one of the things we find too in this work is we're studying people who are thrivers. We're studying people who are having awakening experiences. And Savannah, the level of their happiness is extraordinary. Like we're finding in studies of their brain waves, they have their brain waves 7x, 7 times as happy as the average person. Not 7% happier or 70% happier, 700 times happier. Think about that. Think about being 7 times as happy as you are today. That's the potential of meditation, mindfulness, energy therapies. It can make you not just a little happier, just dramatically happier. And then when we study them long term, we find they become happier and more resilient internally. So they have an internal resilience now in their lives. But it then starts to spread around them as well. They have an external light that just shines from them, and they walk through a city and everyone starts smiling just because they're the emanation in their energy field, which we can measure 15 feet away from your body. So we can measure energy field, and their energy fields are filled with so much love and light. They're affecting everyone around them. And there's a lot of this going on. So there are there negative things going on in the world? Is climate change a problem? Is global conflict a problem? Absolutely. Is there income inequality, gender inequality, racial inequality? All of these things are problems. Species extinction is real. All of these scientifically proven problems are there. And there's so much science now. In my books, I talk about it as well. All of the science showing that the world is getting progressively better, decade by decade by decade. There's all this research, overwhelming, I mean, hundreds of studies showing that humans are thriving as they have literally never thrived before on the planet and becoming more creative. And they're tackling a lot of these big problems, and I expect us to tackle them more and more successfully in the future. So the future I look at, I have a lot of grandkids, and the world I see them inhabiting in 30, 40, 50 years' time is dramatically better than the world of today. And the trend line in all of these studies of global well-being is upward. So that's the way the world is going. And the big data shows that even though you read the news, it's hard to detect that, but it really is there.
Yeah, we get really clouded by the constant influx of negative media because that's what sells. And news, mainstream media, it's a business like anything else. And we're hardwired to pay more attention to the problematic things in the world because historically we needed to know the problematic things in our environment so that we could
Yeah,
stay self-safe. The positive things in our environment didn't really matter because they weren't trying to kill us. They were all fine and dandy and stuff, but that's why negative situations stick with us and pique our attention so much more than positive. But that's also why we have to work harder to find happiness because you do have to build it. You're not just going to stumble across it walking around. Nobody's going to give it to you. You have to cultivate it yourself. But these are all of the tools available to you to build that up.
absolutely. And we have more tools today than we've ever had before. So the only thing you have to do is just use them. They're right there. They produce a much better life. And then when you have that better life, you have perspective. So you read about things that are going wrong in the world and you have that perspective on them. You aren't sucked into them. I mean, I'll just use one example. So we have this terrible war in Ukraine. It's a fact. It's commanding the headlines. But, just go back exactly 30 years and we were having a terrible war in Bosnia and involved Bosnia, Croatia, and people were being massacred. People who were around then may remember the town of Srebrenica, where a whole football stadium full of men and boys was massacred. I mean, there are just horrendous things going on back then, 30 years ago. There were horrendous things going on in 1970, Kent State University massacre. I mean, the Vietnam War was raging. All kinds of things are happening in 1970. Go back further, that we got the Cuban Missile Crisis when literally we were inches away from what's called mutually assured destruction, where there would have been a missile exchange that would have produced a nuclear winter that would have wiped out virtually all life on Earth, an extinction event like the dinosaurs. So, there is the conflict of the day that grabs our attention. We have had a continuous series of conflicts as far back as in human history as we can remember. Do you have perspective on this? And so in 10 years, we'll have perspective on Ukraine, we'll have perspective on Palestine, we'll have perspective on Darfur, we'll have perspective on all the things that so trigger us today. And you, again, as an adult, can choose to move into that perspective now. And meditation puts you there. Because guess what? When you plug into the news of the universe every morning, is love, peace, joy, compassion, gratitude, well-being, exuberance. And that's the undying reality. In some of the great Eastern scriptures, they talk about what's real and what just comes and goes. What's real, what is eternal, is all of those things. What comes and goes is the problem of the moment. And you learn to anchor yourself every day in the real, in the eternal, in the unchanging. You meditate, you hook up with what's greater than yourself. You have resources and tools to handle those things that are coming and going. They're full of drama, they're your body, they're your money, the people around you, the news, and it's just the passing parade. We meet it all with love, compassion, and we don't let any of it take away our joy.
Absolutely. You can always choose where to put your focus. And when you put your focus on all of these problems and the scary things, the anxiety and stress inducing things, then you inevitably become part of the problem, perpetuating all of that. So if you do truly want to be happy, to be peaceful, to be loved and have love, and be, build a better world for us all, then you have to choose to focus on the positive, the peace, the love, the compassion. And if you have to pretend that that's all delusional to do so, because a lot of people go there, they're like, oh, that's all good and dandy and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that this stuff is still happening. I mean, yeah, sure. But we're not saying that you need to put your head in the sand. You can see that, but then you can detach from it and come to a place with, okay, we can't help what's going on across the world. We can't help what's going on in other people's lives to an extent. What we can work on every single day is ourselves.
Absolutely. Rumi put it best. The ancient Persian poet said, yesterday I was ambitious. I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise. I want to change only myself.
Absolutely. And then it builds from there.
Absolutely. Yeah, it spreads out from there.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all of this with us. It's been wonderful. If you would like, tell people where they can find you and what you have to offer them, aside from your books.
Yeah, so I have best-selling science books, and also go to my website, Dawson, my name, just Dawson, Dawson Gift, Gift, DawsonGift.com, and you can get a free copy of my book, the EFT Mini Manual, which has the instructions for that acupressure technique that helped us to treat PTSD in so many veterans and so many people who are suffering. And so you'll get that free EFT mini manual at dawsongift.com and also a free meditation track there. That's the meditation track we used to measure in that study, showing that it rapidly remodels your brain. So all of that is at dawsongift.com. It's also your entryway into our world of practitioners. We do live classes, we have pre-recorded programs, we have online courses for anxiety, insomnia, depression, all kinds of other mental health issues, and all of that's available just by starting at that dawsongift.com website.
Awesome, because this is a lot to cover. And if you're not engrossed, it seems simple to those of us who have been studying it for a while, but to the general public, it is becoming more commonplace and more understood and readily available. But most of the general public don't really know where to start. And in that sense, we say there are resources. You don't have to do it alone. We are always here and happy to help.
Absolutely. There are so many resources. Reach out, work with a practitioner, take a class, read a book, do these things, and they again are your leverage points for a wonderful life. That wonderful life is something we all deserve
Absolutely. And are capable of getting.
and are capable of getting.
Well, thank you so much. I will link all of that close by. Dawson Church, everybody. Great guy, awesome material. Go check him out, his website, and everything that he has to offer you. Also, come hang out with us in the Patreon, where you can get all of these ad-free and video versions, so you get to watch us instead of just listen to us, and you're not interrupted by ads. I'm working on getting us some more meditations in there as well, so be on the lookout for that. You're not going to be able to get them anywhere else. They're only going to be available on the Patreon. That's patreon.com/earth and water. Please rate and review, comment, share with your friends, all the good things that help me continue bringing it to you. And until next week, I love you so much. Thank you for being here. Namaste.